Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and this time I actually have the music in the background so I can hear how loud it is instead of adding it post-recording, even though now that I can hear the music, it makes me sound like I'm starting a Bob Ross series, where I just talk about random stupid crap to the sound of a crackling fire and Skyrim tavern music. But anyway, let's get into it. So, a lot of people have been asking me every stream since the news dropped about the fact that there are no more race packs planned for Total War Warhammer 2. And I should rephrase the way I said that. The way I said that indicated that might change, but we're like easily halfway through the life cycle of Warhammer 2, so I'll rephrase in my tone and say there are no more race packs for Warhammer 2. All that we have left are Lord packs, which is actually pretty interesting. But this has caused, literally, this meme perfectly summarizes the situation, I think, for a lot of the community. Not me personally, but a lot of the community, which is, you see him, like, showing his master plan with the Tomb Kings DLC, and then the Vampire Coast DLC, and then he's got Araby here, but then Grace shows up and ruins it for him. So, there's a few different things to talk about in regards to this announcement. The first is that my personal reaction was that I wasn't surprised. I have always been someone that has hoped for Araby, like distantly, but like I was hoping for Araby with about the same level of belief that I'm hoping that Games Workshop brings back Warhammer Fantasy to tabletop. Like, it just didn't really seem like something that was ever going to happen. The Southlands is crowded with stuff now. I mean, they've only made the Bretonnians there more and more and more important as we've moved further onwards, and that they are literally a integral part of the Bretonnian campaign. You're supposed to send somebody down to meet with those factions so you can confederate with them and start your crusades against the Tomb Kings. But a lot of people seem to live a bit in a bubble where they were just expecting this race to fall out of the sky and land in their laps, and that's just not what's going to happen. Especially because Araby is a bit of a tricky one. Most people who I think come into Total War Warhammer don't have a ton of experience with Warhammer Fantasy as their background. So they don't, they're not familiar with Games Workshop or Warhammer Fantasy to a large extent. So you get a lot of people who come in and they'll talk to some overly ambitious individual who's like, Araby and Cathay and Amazons and Nippon and Ind were all playable. And somebody will say that with a straight face, and they should be slapped because they're not lying, but they're being very disingenuous, or they're being very thoughtless. Because there's this funny thing where we're dealing with a game that's had over 30 years of being around. And it has changed a lot over those 30 years. And the problem is, in my opinion, you have individuals who have spoon-fed myths and bullshit to the large community and kind of built up a lot of hopes and ambitions about races and DLCs like Araby that were always very, very, very unlikely to happen. But some people were like, oh, yeah, Araby's like a well-established thing, yada yada, even though we know very little about Araby. Very, very little. Like, there's not really any books that take place in Araby, and those that do have Araby scenes are incredibly short compared to, like, everybody else. The Vampire Coast even was fairly, like, in the back of Warhammer Fantasy's mind until the end times came along, and it sort of, like, refreshed and brought back the Vampire Coast to the fore which is where this image is from. This style of artwork is End Times, for anyone curious. That's Luther. That's the GW End Times picture of Luther Harkon and his first mate, Captain Drekla. But in any event, like, I mean, you can even tell just looking at this image. This is official Warhammer Fantasy art. This is official Warhammer Fantasy art. This is not. But so reaction-wise, that's kind of how I feel about that. Is that was not at all surprised, and I think anyone that was super surprised, although I want to talk a fair bit about going forwards and the possibility of seeing the likes of Araby in the future, I do want to go ahead and say, if you were the kind of person who was genuinely expecting Araby, like if you were like me and you were hoping that Araby would show up but you didn't have any expectations, then I think you're in a good headspace. But if you're someone that genuinely believed Araby was going to be happening, I think you need to seriously re-examine how you think groups or races are selected to be put into the game, because you need to understand that just because something exists in Warhammer does not make it viable for support from Creative Assembly, because Creative Assembly has to get the okay from Games Workshop. And Games Workshop has a large amount of content that they don't want people to mess with, because they don't want to mess with it. Basically, it's things that they want to forget about. Anything that did not exist did not exist in, I would say, 8th edition, is usually in a pretty dangerous spot for not appearing in the Total War Warhammer series, because it's in an uncomfortable position. You know, the Vampire Coast shows up a fair bit in 8th edition and showed up prominently in the End Times. You have Bretonnia, and Bretonnia, even though they had a 6th edition book, were still a playable faction in 8th edition, and were very, very busy in 8th edition. And all of the crazy monsters we've seen come from a book that was released during 8th edition, which is the edition that lore-wise and content-wise Total War Warhammer is based on. And just because I've seen a lot of broken hearts, and I'm hoping it's because of hope and not expectation, the likes of Araby, the Southern Realms, Dogs of War, Cathay, Nippon, and those are all things that are extremely unlikely to land in the Warhammer franchise, because they are all nations and designs that Games Workshop has grabbed by the hair and shoved underneath the water and is doing their damnedest to drown it. As far as they were concerned, it's already dead. It's only because of the Total War Warhammer community that anyone's trying to like poke it with a stick and see if it's still moving. So, moving forward with the conversation, do I think that this means that there's no chance of us getting Araby? Like, the Araby ship has sailed and that's it? No, I do not believe that. I genuinely believe that there is a chance we will see Araby one day. But I do not think it will happen in a vacuum. I made a video a few days ago called, like, I Need Your Help, Cathay Needs Your Help, I think is the name of the video, which now that I think about it was probably a stupid title because it makes it hard to reference. But in it, I talked about the GW community survey. If you're someone that is dearly, dearly, dearly hoping, like I am, to see more human factions be playable in Warhammer Fantasy, like Araby, Cathay, yada yada, and also bringing in monsters and creatures and magic and weapons from other nations and our world's own mythologies, then you owe it to yourself and to the Warhammer community to go fill out that survey. And it's a very long survey, but to fill it out, and at the end of it, you basically get a prompt where it's like, is there anything you want GW to know? And that's where you have to like really go ham. If you go to that video, you can find all the details and a link, and I even have like a copy pasta that you can just copy and paste into that section if you don't want to like think about what you want to write. You just want to write a respectful, like you're like, I wish I could just throw a respectful message in. But the big thing I want to get across is that I believe deeply, based on the conversations I've had with many people, and based on just a lot of information and a fair amount of gut feeling, I'll admit, that Creative Assembly wants to make more race packs for Warhammer. They want to do Araby. They want to do Cathay. They want to do Nippon. They're a company that has this massive history of making historical games for nations all over the world. And I'm sure to them, the idea of using that to create a fantasy version to fit along with Warhammer is just an awesome idea. But you have to remember that Games Workshop, although they, are working very, very hard, Creative Assembly is working very hard on all this, they don't have the final decision power. Games Workshop does. And I genuinely have come to believe that Games Workshop is the one pulling the trigger on this. And if Games Workshop does not want there to be an Araby or a Cathay or any other human realm, especially because right now they're still developing their basic human faction for Age of Sigmar, and we don't know what that looks like yet. It could be that, I don't know, maybe Games Workshop is going to try and design a human faction that incorporates more than just like stereotypical steampunk-esque Holy Roman Empire Germany, or like, just those Western countries. Maybe they want to try and, because even reading certain Age of Sigmar books that I have, there is an equivalent to Araby already in Age of Sigmar. I forget what the name of the country is, but there's like this massive country in the Realm of Fire, which is basically the equivalent of like the Middle East as far as like the terrain and all that stuff, and like the people. And there's even the Gotrek audiobook, the newest one, Realm Slayer, where Gotrek meets somebody from that country, and he sounds, acts, dresses, fights, and everything like someone from Araby. So it seems like Games Workshop has recycled a lot of those nations from fantasy into AOS, which can, if that's true, puts them in a very awkward position from their standpoint. I'm not very sympathetic to it, but if Games Workshop is suddenly like, hey, we want to develop a Free People's book, but maybe the Free People's book comes with like a classic Empire flavor, and then like an Araby flavor, and then like a Cathay flavor, they may not want that to be released for Warhammer, especially because if they're going to do something like Araby and Cathay Creative Assembly, they're going to need Games Workshop's help, because Games Workshop has to make sure it fits in their universe, and that's going to actually require some effort on Games Workshop's part. Games Workshop, you can't, like, the Vampire Coast was super cool, but virtually not a single unit from the Vampire Coast roster was literally like unique. Like, it wasn't like new. Everything in there was from a book or a magazine, a White Dwarf magazine, but it was something that, like, if you just did a tiny bit of digging, you could easily find the source material for all of it. Araby, Cathay, and Nippon, those countries of men, it gets way more difficult. There is nothing on most of them. And what there is like crazy old and outdated, and was designed for a completely different game system. I literally had somebody the other day send me like a document, and they were like, hey, look, there's official rules for Nippon and End, so they could totally be added to the game. Or it was Nippon and Cathay, I think. And I opened it, and it was literally from like Warhammer Fantasy 3rd edition or something like that. So like, not only is it debatably super racist, but like the artwork and all the descriptions and stuff, but it was so old that even though I have been playing the game for almost 20 years, I couldn't even understand the rules because it's so old that like modern Warhammer doesn't even relate to it. And you can't use that as a source. You know, it just doesn't translate. So I'm rambling a bit, so let me get back on topic. Of overall, because I don't want this video to go too long, and if I let myself, I could easily talk for 3 hours. Overall, I would say that I am not surprised and I am not disappointed that we're not getting any more race packs. We are about where I thought we would be in this scenario, and I wasn't expecting Cathay, so I'm not disappointed. I'm not upset. Or Araby. However, I do hope that as a community, we can respectfully keep applying pressure to Games Workshop and Creative Assembly, but mostly Games Workshop, by like tweeting at them and any opportunity we get to not harass them, but like poke them, you know? It's a shame that like one of the easiest way to get in contact with Games Workshop is like through their Twitch account, but you have to be a subscriber to talk to them on Twitch, which is so scummy. But that's beside the point. I hope to see this in the future. Personally, I am way more excited for more Lord packs than I am for more race packs right now, because Lord packs just mean expanding on the races we already have, and we've already gotten like the stereotypical, you know, cross section for Skaven, Lizardman, and High Elf, Dark Elf. So more Lord packs means they have to do something different. Because if you remember in game 1, we went Lord pack for, or no, we had Beastman. Wait, was it Lord pack first or Beastman first? I'm pretty sure it was Beastman first, then Grim in the Grave, then Wood Elves, then, or actually, I guess technically it was Warriors of Chaos, Beastman, Grim in the Grave, Wood Elves, King of the Warlord, and then Norska. And somewhere in that mix, they free LC'd Bretonnia, but it didn't count as a DLC. And that was it for Game 1's dev cycle. But Game 2, I feel like I'm missing something, but whatever. But for Game 2, we've done that same party. We just don't have a third race. Instead, they're giving us more Lord packs. But they can't just give us one more. They've got to give us at least 2 more. That way it like stays even. But even then, if they do like, what are they gonna do? Are they gonna do like Lizardmen versus Dark Elves and Skaven versus High Elves? Because that would be kind of weird, right? Like, because one of the things that would be super exciting that I've always been hoping for but didn't think was really possible was like Game 1 versus Game 2. So like a lot of people, myself included, are dying to see a Eltharion the Grim versus Grom the Paunch DLC, which would be High Elves versus Greenskins. Now, at first, I didn't think that was possible to do because it was like, well, how would you do that? Like, if someone doesn't own Game 1, but they own the DLC, like, would they only get, like, part of the Greenskin roster? But how would that work since, like, most of the Greenskin roster is tied to, like, Grimgor and Azhag? Would you just not have access? You know, yada, yada, yada. But if they have thought of a way to make it work, I am all ears. Because I'm gonna buy it. I don't fucking care. Like if you don't own Game 1, but you're like, I like Greenskins, and you're like want to play Grom the Paunch, then I don't know what's wrong with you, man. You need to hurry up and get Game 1. You can get it for so cheap these days too. Anyway, but I am super hoping that's what they're gonna do. Because if they're gonna do that, then surely they gotta do 3 more, right? Like you could do Skaven versus Dwarves, Dark Elves versus the Empire. You could do like Lizardmen versus Vampire Counts, maybe, I don't know. And then like High Elves versus Greenskins. You know, you could have all the Game 1 guys versus all the Game 2 guys. I mean, hell, I would even take a DLC for DLC, which I know they've said in the past they don't want to do that. But, like, if they came out and were like, all right, Wood Elves versus Beastmen DLC, you know, here's Ariel versus, what, God dang it, what's his name? Tarex the Brass Bull. I would, oh my God, I'd be throwing so much money at the screen, it would, like, break, and it would be awful, and I'd cry. But it'd be totally worth it. So, yeah, I'm not bothered at all, quite frankly, about no more race packs, because I think any further races would require a ton of effort on Games Workshop's part, and so far Games Workshop has done a really good job of not distancing themselves from Total War Warhammer, but like keeping it very separate from themselves. So I don't really feel like they feel that much responsibility towards it, and they're not, I don't think they are going to help make something like Araby or Cathay or Kislev or the Border Princes or the Southern Realms like Tilia and Astalia and the Border Princes, which are all technically Southern Realms. I don't think they're going to do that unless there's a push from the community. So wrapping up thoughts, if you want to know ultimately what my opinion is, it's that I'm happy we're getting Lord packs. I would prefer those over race packs at this point. So I am 100% awesome, glad, happy with the plan. But I would like to see races like Araby in the future one day. I would love to get a DLC that expands out the human races. You know? And I don't even think we would need like a race pack that necessarily is just Araby, because it'd be a little weird. But like if they released a campaign/race pack that was just called Southern Realms, and it gave you like mixed units but then a unique roster for each lord, and each lord was a different country. So like there was one legendary lord for Araby, so he only needed like one province because there'd actually be enough space for that. So if you had one dude from Araby, and then you had like one guy from the Border Princes, one guy from Tilia, and one guy from Astalia, done. Those are all like the super popular nations of men that could share a roster of like basic troops that, you know, they would just be like thematically different looking, but they could share a roster of basic troops and then just have a like, you know, a good like 5 to 10 unique units to each one of them. And that would work super well as a Dogs of War or Southern Realms DLC. That would be a kick-ass race pack. But like I said, that will never happen unless you push for it hard and consistently. You know, one of the things that I hate seeing is when a community like pushes for something and then like after the hype calms down, people stop trying and stop pushing, and so everyone just walks away from it because who cares, right? I mean, this is literally one of those things where I know I'm going to be tweeting or at least messaging on Facebook and Twitter and whatever Games Workshop once a month for the next 2 to... I'm anticipating bothering people for at least the next 2 to 3 years to get Araby and Cathay. So if that's something you want to see, then that's the commitment you got to sign up for, man. You know, a lot of people are just expecting this super underdeveloped part of the lore to just like fucking fall out of the sky and be amazing, and it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen because Games Workshop does not have a massive incentive to do it. Because I'm sure from their perspective, they're like, no, we'd rather just focus on AOS. We don't want to focus on developing new stuff for fantasy. But we got to convince them that it's worth it, at least for Total War Warhammer. And like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if they made those models and units for Total War Warhammer and then they released them and you could play them in AOS, so it could actually be like a bridge to get maybe allow Total War Warhammer players to kind of like ease into Age of Sigmar if they don't want to play like one of the crazy new factions, but they still want something new. You know, I don't know. It's just some thoughts. But in any event, I hope that answers my thoughts on that. I know a lot of people have been asking for it. and I've been talking for a long time now, so I'm going to go ahead and end it there. If you want to check out all of the really interesting information, which I'm kind of been having here on screen, where they're just talking about, like, there's a lot of more stuff coming in future Lord packs. They're wanting to keep adding more free units and characters in Game 2's life cycle and all that stuff. I would highly recommend going onto Reddit and just going to the Q&A thread that's been stickied on r/Total War, and you can find all the information there. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll catch you next time.